All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So we can get going. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see. I'm just looking through the questions. Okay, so one of these is really straightforward. So I'm going to post it up here. All right, so one of the questions on the survey is this: why do we use a plus equal, a plus equal b instead of just a equals a plus b? Yeah, short answer is yeah, it's just for less coding. You know, something plus or a equals a plus b is the kind of formulation that we use a lot. As you've already probably noticed, you've probably already used it a fair bit. And so instead of writing the whole thing over and over, like in detail all the time, sometimes it's a lot quicker and shorter to just kind of use this kind of shortcut. Yeah, that's basically it. Both things are equal. Yeah, I think pretty much in all the ways they're all basically equivalent. So you can use one or the other; it doesn't matter at all. Sometimes writing it out the long way is better or easier, just because. I mean, for simple things like that, maybe not so much, but sometimes like more complicated things that you can write shorter. Sometimes I like to write it out a little bit longer just to have it kind of more visually obvious what I'm actually trying to do, right? So again, just personal preference, whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever you want to do is absolutely fine. Okay, yeah, we can go over Booleans in general. That's totally fine. We'll do that in a minute because that might take a little bit. So we'll dive into that in a second. So all right, someone asked. What's the question here? So for the coding questions, right? So like I said, the exam is a bunch of like multiple choice questions, and then there are 3 coding questions. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so 48 questions total. 45 are multiple choice, worth 70% of your grade. 3 questions that are basically function writing drills, similar to the coding assignments, obviously shorter, that make up 30% of your grade. Okay, so the question is, so for the coding questions, will we receive guidance on using /t or tabs? For instance, will it be in the description stated to use tab when printing? So yeah, so short version is yes. Basically, we won't. Let me think. Yeah, all right. So for the midterm, definitely. I don't think there's any of that fancy formatting stuff. Most of the formatting is just kind of you need to print this. So there's not like complicated like this is tabbed and this is like untabbed or anything like that. I think for the final there might be some of that, and so you'll need to be careful with that. But for the midterm, I don't think there's any of that. So that shouldn't be an issue. And if we do require it, we will actually explicitly state it. Okay. Yeah, we can do some of those. Lily, can you tell me? Let me pull up the study guide. I haven't looked at it recently. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to either, so I'm not sure what is weird.
There was just a part where it says what is weird, and then weird is in the font that you usually put Python notation in.
It's on the last page of the study guide.
Let's see if I can. There we go. Oh yeah, okay. So actually here, let me make sure I don't have anything from the exam up. And then I'll share my screen. Okay, let me share my screen real quick. All right, can everyone see that?
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, so here basically it's asking, so when it's saying what is weird, it's basically asking you what this thing is, right? Because you have a variable. So in this bit of code, you're doing stuff. One of the things that you're doing stuff with is the variable weird that you initially put an empty string into it, and then you do stuff with it inside of the for loop, right? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I just missed that first part where it says weird up there. But
Yeah,
yes,
so
totally.
So it's probably asking, I mean, probably asking like what type of object weird is. So what type of object would it be?
Would be a string. Is that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it'd be a string,
Okay.
and it would have what inside of it?
It would have. Oh, sorry, I didn't go through this exactly.
All right, that's okay. We can.
It would
go
have
back.
the each letter repeated 3 times of
Yeah, so D D
the
D
word.
O O O and G G G, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what weird is. Yeah, I mean the formulation of that question is weird itself, so I get why that was confusing. But basically, it's just asking like what's actually in this variable at the end of it.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. So let me just take some notes because there's some stuff that I want to come back to that's just going to take a minute to kind of deal with. So that got taken care of. That's there. That will come back to also. That's a really good question. So I can say for sure that the coding questions are not turtle related. So I can say at least that much. But actually, let me double check. I think it's entirely possible that there's no turtle on the quiz, but let me actually double check. Or sorry, on the midterm, which is a quiz, but yeah. Yeah, no turtle. So yeah, so there shouldn't be any turtle anything on the midterm. Okay. Okay, I think we can dig into. So of the stuff that I've covered so far, are there any questions about any of that, or can we is that good and we can move on to the next thing?
We can move on to the next thing for me.
Okay. Okay. All right, so let's do a simple one next, which is this. All right, so the question is when we would use this and this, right? Which right now I'm blanking on the name of the second one. What's it called? My memory is terrible. But yeah, either way, let's do some examples. Actually, let's do it. Okay. So let's just use this to start. Yeah. Okay. Nope. There we go. All right. So the question is when we would use integer division. Thank you, Lily. So when you use basically just normal division and integer division, right? So the question is, so what's the difference between the two, right? So really simply, if we do, for example, 14 divided by 9, which is probably going to give something weird. So if we do this, which by the way, hopefully.
We can't see the screen. I don't know if you're.
No, I forgot to share it. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so say that we have 14 divided by 9, and then we just run this bit of code. Python down here does 14 divided by 9, which is 1.5, right? So that's normal division, and that basically is just division the way that we all understand division to be, where it actually divides everything exactly the way that we'd expect, right? Integer division is similar, except it basically just ignores all the remainders, right? Or all the remainder. And so the reason, basically the reason you would use integer division is anytime where you want to know how many wholes of something there is in a number, right? So how many 9s are there in 14? There's 1 9 in 14, and then there's some extra remainder left over, right? So like 14 minus 9 is 5, so it'd be like 9 and then a remainder of 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and so essentially that's really all that it does. And the thing is, like, sometimes that's what you want, right? You don't want the decimals. You just want to know how many times this thing fits into this other thing. Arguably, you could do 14 divided by 9, then round it down afterwards. But that's like one extra step that you don't need to do if you just use integer division, right? Yeah, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So on the midterm, will we have to use round in our coding, or would we just use the example that you gave as the second example?
By second example, do you mean this?
Line 22, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So so for the midterm, it doesn't matter. So for the midterm, the coding question, so that's not true. So the multiple choice questions, they will be very specific, and there might be specific things about rounding or integer division. Those things might be there, but those questions will be specifically about those concepts. So you need to answer relative to that concept, right? For the coding questions, for one thing to know is that there is no test function for the coding questions. So it's not like the coding homework where it just kind of gets put through this thing and it comes out with a grade. We are manually grading all of those, all of your codes. And the bottom line for all of the coding questions is, does your function run and does it do everything it's supposed to do? That's all I really care about. If you get there through round or through integer division, I don't care. It doesn't really matter, as long as your function does everything it's supposed to do.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the best thing I can say for testing your functions is once you've written them, and you are allowed to use VS Code, like the way that I would recommend doing it is basically look at the question in the D2L quiz, code it all out in VS Code, to actually test it out in VS Code or wherever you want to test it out, but actually test it. You know, if your function is supposed to do this, this, and this, make sure that it does all of those three things. Test it with those three different conditions, right? Like if it's supposed to do one thing when you say y, and one thing when you say n, and one thing when you say maybe, test those three conditions and make sure that it actually does what it's supposed to do, right?
Mhm.
So, and that's basically, that's how we're going to be grading your coding assignments, is we're basically going to use test cases, like try to test every single condition, every single thing that your function is supposed to do, make sure that it's actually doing it correctly. So if you do that beforehand, then you should basically be good to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and is that good for integer division?
Yes, for me it's fine.
All right, cool. All right, so what else do we have? Okay, here, let's actually throw that onto there. And sort of what I'm doing now to answer these questions is kind of what I would recommend when you're kind of like trying to figure this stuff out on your own. This is the way that when I'm not sure how something works, I just kind of mess with it until I know how it works, right? And that is by far the best way that you can kind of learn all of this stuff. And just kind of like doing like silly examples like this where I'm testing these two things, and like by doing 14 divided by 9, I'm like, oh, I understand now how this works and what this does, right? Which again is like a really obvious example, but that's kind of the idea. And so here I'll basically be doing the same thing. So Booleans, right? So Booleans are basically a type of object in Python. They basically have one of two values. They can either be true or false, and that's it, right? So I think there's a few reasons why Booleans are difficult for students to kind of wrap their heads around it. I think the main one is sort of having trouble breaking down more complicated bits of code into something really, really simple, right? And that's by far the thing that you should be doing, is if you can understand, if for example, you read all of this, like even, I read all of this, I'm like, oh shoot, I don't know, I'm not sure. Like it takes me a minute to, like, I can't just look at this and be like, oh, I know what this is, right? I can't do that. The way I would tackle this is exactly the way that I would tackle a math problem, which is basically break it down by small bits and resolving the small bits, and then working my way up from there, right? So, so for example, if you have this, first thing I would do is, so this is like a small statement within the larger statement, and I would ask myself, what does this evaluate to? What value does this have? So what value does this have? And yes, it's not a trick question, it's a really silly question. What value does this have, this bit of code?
True.
True, right? So that's really easy. What value does this have?
It could either be true or false.
Nope. When Python reads this, it doesn't read true or false. It reads the or is basically this will evaluate to either true or false, not true or false. It will either have the value of true or the value of false.
It would be true, right?
It would be true, right? So when you're working with an or, as long as one of them is true, then true or false evaluates to true, right? So the way that, like, just like a math problem, the way that you could reword that is like that, right? All right, so what does this evaluate to?
False.
False, right? So as long as if either one of these is false, with an and, it'll be false. And so false and false evaluates to, actually, let's down here. All right. So what does this evaluate to?
False.
False, right? So rewriting the whole thing down again, what does this evaluate to?
False.
False, right? And there we go, we're done, right? And so that's the thing, like if you try to tackle like a whole bunch of code like this all at once, like of course it's gonna be confusing, like for anyone, including if you've been coding for a really long time, it takes a minute to like work it out. And the way that you work it out is you basically, like, in your head, you might work it out, but really if you're not sure, if you're just kind of like starting out, just do it like this. It's just like a math problem. You just solve little bits of code until you get down to whatever this chunk of code evaluates to, right? So, and arguably what you could do is if you did this, if you spelled it properly, however, what would this evaluate to then?
Well, false equals false, right? So false.
So
Wouldn't
if you
it be
have,
true?
yeah, because if you do false equals false, that's true, right? False is false, right?
Oh,
Which I know that's why I threw that in there, because I know it's a little bit confusing. But that's essentially the way you have to like think about these things. You just always have to think like this is false equals false, and then if you look at this, then it's a little bit more obvious that these two things are obviously equivalent, right? Does that make sense? Okay, and actually, let me just so I'm not confusing things, because I'm going to put this the Py file up on D2L later or on Slack, and just to make sure that I'm not writing things that are not true. Right. So these are all equivalent. These are all these lines of code are saying the exact same thing, right? Or they all evaluate to the exact same thing. And these two lines of code evaluate to the same thing, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Mhm.
All right. And does that sort of answer that question, or is there anything else that you're kind of like confused about with Booleans, or anything else you want me to kind of go over?
That was it. Just like when they put a lot of words in it, and then it got confusing.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is like that thing of breaking it down to like small bits of code, it applies to absolutely everything in coding. If you have a really complicated like function that you're writing and there's like an error in it, what you do is you break it down to the smallest bit of code that you're pretty sure is right, and you check it, is this right? Yes, move on to the next biggest, like the next smallest bit of code, chunk of code that you're sure about, and then test that. Does that work? Yes, and kind of build up from there. And eventually, as you're kind of adding and adding and adding stuff, at some point it'll break, and then you know this is where my error is, right?
What if you have, for instance, with the not true or true and false or false and true? Does it matter whether true comes first in the and statement or at the end? Does it matter where it's positioned?
So you're asking, if I understand correctly, you're asking if these things are equivalent?
For the and statement mainly.
Okay, so you're saying, oh, let's do true. You're saying, are these two the same?
Yeah, does it have like an order that it runs into? Like, does Python check for one first, or does it check for everything at once?
So so that's a tricky question. So technically Python reads it in an order. So Python will read true and false. So there is an order. However, Python doesn't care if it's true that's first or false that's first. As long as one of these two is false, it'll evaluate to false. Does that make sense? Or another way of saying that is, unless both are true, it'll evaluate to false, which is kind of saying the same thing. Does that kind of make sense?
I think that I just need to sit with it a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's all confusing. Like, yeah, it is confusing. But essentially, the short answer is yes. These two things are exactly equivalent. Both of these will evaluate to. What do you think? True or false?
I think true, but I think that I'm wrong.
So in order for this, so actually, let's see. So the contingency table for and is this. So this is the contingency table for and. The only case in which an and will be true is if both of them are true.
Okay.
Right. So and you can kind of see here, like what we have here is this and this both evaluate to false, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so does like the false, right? So for an and, let's do this. Yeah, for an and, this is what it looks like. And what about for an or? What does that look like? Would this one be true or false?
Well, it would be true.
Right. What about this one?
True. That one would be true as well because it doesn't matter, and that's false.
Yeah, and so essentially, like, a way to think about it, if it does not confuse you, if it does, don't worry about it. But essentially, and or are sort of like the opposite, right? And is only true when both are true, and or is only false when both are false.
Yeah, this makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like I know when I like way back when I was like first learning about this stuff, I would get confused with this like all the time. It would take me a minute. I have to like literally like draw out these tables every single time. But it gets easier over time. So those two should evaluate too.
That one would be false.
Right, and
So they would both be false.
exactly right. Okay. Anything else about booleans and all of that?
I have one more thing.
Sure.
So for the like not in front, you can just solve what's the inside first and then put the not, or is
So you
I
can think of
forgot how I learned it because I've learned it once before, and the way they explained it was the not will change the or to and I'm a bit confused about that.
yeah, that's another way you can do it. In my opinion, it's more confusing. But essentially, so it comes back to what I just said, right? So I just said the and or are sort of opposites. And so the not is essentially flipping the and to the or to an and, which is another way of doing it. But it's, in my opinion, it's more confusing than anything. Like, I don't know. So it's up to you. Like, if that makes sense to you, then fine, then go for it. But if it doesn't, like, just like again, like for me, you know, you've done math since pretty much you've been in school, right? So and this is just like a math problem with words, right? And a not is basically like a minus in front of a parenthesis.
Okay, I like that explanation. It makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, so that anyway, that's the way it kind of works out in my head. And so in that way, like for me, the easiest way to solve that is to like solve what's in the parenthesis and then just do a not on top of it, right? Like there's no sense in like, again, this is the way that I solve math too. Like I don't do like the minus and then solve everything. I don't like get rid of the minus and then change the signs of everything in the parenthesis. I solve what's in the middle and then just throw in a minus at the end, right? Yeah, just for me conceptually, it's way easier to like wrap my head around that. So that's just kind of how I do it. Yeah, but again, like this, like Boolean and logic is just like math. You can do it a bunch of different ways, and if you did it right, you'll end up at the exact same result, right? Where you should. Anything else?
Could we do an example of conversion by index?
Yeah. So yeah. We'll get to the other questions in a minute. I just want to make sure that we wrapped up Booleans before we move on to the next thing. The only thing that I want to mention again is just like math, there's an order of operations, right? So you can't just do like anything in whatever order you want. And the order of operations is in the slides, and you can kind of go over it if you're not sure about it. Yeah, so just make sure that you're aware of that for this to kind of work, right? Okay. Okay, so let me, okay, so that's good. Okay, other simple questions. So clear instructions on how to format your answers. So it's not going to be like a quiz, or wait, actually, let me stop sharing my screen real quick. So the coding questions are basically like text questions for quizzes, where basically, you know, like if you're writing a paragraph or whatever, you're just putting your code in there. So what you can literally do is take your code from VS Code and then copy paste it into there, and it should be good. Make sure that the tabs and everything look right, that the formatting doesn't get screwed up when you copy paste it. But basically, that's the way it is. And the way that we're gonna, and if you want to 100% make sure, take your code from your D2L quiz answer, paste it, copy paste it into VS Code, and run it exactly as is. If it runs perfectly, then you're fine, because that's the way we're basically going to test it. We're going to open up D2L, we're going to take your thing, copy paste into VS Code, run it, and see if it works. If it throws errors, then that's a bad sign for you. Maybe your formatting and your tabs are wrong. Yeah, but that for the coding questions, that's the way it's going to work. For the other questions, the multiple choice, I believe that they're all, I think there's no like short answer I think they're all multiple choice. So let me just double check that just to make sure I'm not telling you something that's totally wrong. Yeah, absolutely. So it's all multiple choice. There's no short answer, so you won't have to mess around with the getting the quotes right or anything like that. There's none of that in the midterm.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. So, but like I said, so the rest is multiple choice, so that's easy. And then all the coding questions, just make sure that when you copy paste from D2L into VS Code, that it works straight away. That it doesn't need to be like reformatted or done anything. It has to work like straight away. Okay. Other questions? All right. So is the midterm open note or not? The other review session that you're talking about, was that the one done with Sarah?
Yeah.
Or was that with me? Yeah, so Sarah, that's from a while ago, like maybe even 2 years ago. And way back when they used to not do it open note and with Examity, which I'm not messing with any of that. I don't, yeah, so short answer is it's open note. You can use all the notes you want. You can Google stuff. You can like whatever, like use whatever you want. However, and this is extremely important, that does not mean that you can just copy paste stuff. You can look stuff up to see how stuff works. You can look up how you did that, like in a previous homework assignment or whatever, but all of your code needs to be freshly written code. If it's copy pasted from somewhere else, that is plagiarism and that is a problem. All right, but otherwise it's all open note. The idea being that I want to know what you know, not what you remember, right? So so either you know it or you don't know it, or so if you can do it, if you can just code this stuff during the exam, that's all I really care about. I don't care if you like forgot some small detail or whatever. Like that's not what I'm trying to assess. I'm trying to assess what you actually know, what you understand.
I have a question to go off of this.
Yeah.
Do you want us to document in our coding for the exam, like we do homeworks, or no?
No, you don't need to. No, and definitely like unless it's useful for you, then don't. Because it's just more time that you don't need to be spending doing that. Yeah, and like I said, for the coding questions, like all I really care about is, does your code work and does it do everything that it's supposed to do? And I do mean everything. Like if you think about the the pig.py homework, does it roll from 1 to 6, or does it roll, what does this dice roll properly? What happens if you enter nonsense when you ask to roll again instead of like yes, no, maybe? All of those little things, they all need to work exactly the way they're supposed to work. And so that's how you should be testing your code. I mean, that's how generally you should be testing your code, but definitely for the exam, that's how we're testing your code, and that's how you should be testing your code. Okay, do we have to write pseudocode? No. Jimmy, no. So no, like I said, it's all multiple choice, and all of those will be, the format of the multiple choice are going to be really similar to a lot of the quizzes that you've done before. So that should feel pretty familiar. And then the rest is just code. So no pseudocode, no anything like that. Okay, let's see. There's another question here. Okay, so one question is about worksheet 8, which I think I'll hang on before doing that. So we can do traversing by index next. Yeah, okay. So let's do a little traversing. Okay. And I know that traversing is hard. So yeah, I feel like that's one of the ones that often comes up at the review. So any functions that you, sorry, just answering the question about we work with a random function. So any of the functions that you have used so far could be required in the exam. So, so for example, the random could be used. I'm not. Yeah, or I mean, like basically everything that you've done so far could be part of the coding question. So, and random is part of that. Okay. So traversing by index. So what does that mean? What's the point of traversing by index, and what does it do? Anyone?
Are you asking, wait, did you ask what traversing by index does?
Yeah.
I think it like goes through in like, at least the way I understand it, it's like going through each like letter by letter, or like the numbers that are assigned to the letters or whatever, rather than going by like the entire like block of the word. But I'm sure it can be explained more concisely.
No, I mean,
than that.
but I mean that's pretty good. That's pretty good, like functional definition, right? I mean, traversing basically means that we're going through something that has multiple elements. And by index is just the way that you're going through it, right? So instead of using the word itself, you're using the index of each element in that thing, right? Does that kind of make sense? And so what that means, so what are different types of objects that have multiple elements? What are things that you can traverse?
Words,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
like words, like
What's another word in Python for words?
Strings.
Strings, right? All right. What else? What else can you traverse? Oh, actually, have we? I forget where
Have
the.
anything else that we
Yeah.
can
Okay. So
traverse?
have we not talked about lists yet?
No,
Yeah. Okay.
I don't
Then,
think
yeah.
so.
Then ignore that. Never mind. So later, probably right after the midterm, you'll learn that there's a bunch of other stuff that you can traverse. Lists are among them, but that doesn't matter. Essentially, the idea is strings are definitely things that you can traverse because they have multiple elements, right? And so in a string, for example, the string potato, how many elements does potato have?
6.
Potato has 6 elements, and each letter is one of the elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Wait, isn't that an index? Or is it also called an element, like a one letter portion of a string?
So the letter, the character itself is the element, and then the element has an index, which is the position inside of the object. Yeah. So
right.
so the first element is the character P, and its index is
0.
Yeah. 0, right? And so when we're saying traversing by index, is what we're saying is essentially we're basically doing a loop where each iteration of the loop, we're using the index, so the number of the position of the thing in the position of the element inside of the, in this case, a string, to isolate, identify, or like whatever, do something with one element at a time, right? Does that make sense? Sort of. So if we want to say that we want to traverse potato by index and print each letter one letter at a time, how would we do that?
Would it be for I and Len potato or Len? Well, wouldn't you
Wouldn't you make it
Would you-
work for Wouldn't you assign like?
Yeah, sorry. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, you would do that first. I was just not thinking about that. All right. So you do for I in.
And then my string, and then yeah.
And then
Print, I would assume.
print what?
My string.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at what would happen. So actually, so first thing, so what we're trying to do is to get it to do P, print P, then print O, then print T, print A. And so what I'm expecting to see at the end of this is it should print out P, then O, then T, and blah, 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 one after the other on a separate line, right? Because each print statement should do a return line at the end of it. And so by the end of it, what I expect to see is, oh, that is not working.
Can I add something to the print statement?
Yeah, so I can tell you right now that this won't work. So we'll need to work at it. But first, I just want to, just like I would always do, is before I actually run anything, I'm going to come up with a guess of what I think is going to happen, and then look at what actually does happen, right? So this is what I would expect to happen, or this is what I want to happen, right?
Mhm.
So right now, if we run this, so it throws me an error. So at the very start, we already have an issue there. So let's ignore that for now, and then I think was it Lauren or someone wanted to add something?
Yeah. After my string, could you put brackets then I inside?
And why are we doing that?
Because it gives you the character or the element at the index of I.
Exactly right. So if we just print, if we just print my string, oh, that's yeah. What does my string evaluate to?
Potato.
Potato. And so if we print my string, it will print
Potato.
potato, right? So if we don't have the bracket I over here, it would just print potato a bunch of times, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so definitely we need that bracket I. And so what else is wrong here? Why is it throwing the error?
Don't you need to make it a string by putting str in front of my string?
I'm sorry, like your volume's a little bit low and I didn't quite catch all of that.
By the print statement on line 67, would you put within the print brackets str, then open your bracket my string?
I see. So you're saying that this is where this error is coming at, where it's saying it's trying to, it's getting an int where it should be a string, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if we actually look at the error that it's saying, int object is not iterable. What does iterable mean? Do we know?
I have it in my mind, but I can't get it into words.
I mean, just throw stuff out there. I'm sure you're actually pretty close. So just throw like a soup of words and we'll figure it out.
I was thinking iteration, like it does multiple times, like increases.
Yeah.
by one.
Okay. Yeah. So that's definitely like that is a big part of it. In the case of Python, when it says iterable, it's actually another way of saying traversing.
Mm.
So it's saying there's an int object that it's not able, or you can't traverse an int, is what it's saying.
Oh.
Can I say what we missed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't it be for I in range?
Yeah, exactly. If I could spell. All right. So now, now what do we think? Do you think this is going to work? We feel pretty good about it.
I think so.
All right. So let's just think about why you need a range there, right? And this will actually like lead into traversing by index, which is another way of doing it, right? So if you did, for example, for I in length of my string. So again, I'm going to do exactly what I just said that we should do when we're coding. Is I'm going to break this down. If I'm getting an error, like I'm going to break it down to something a little bit easier to kind of wrap my head around, right? So length of my string is another way of saying what?
The length of your word, which means 6.
Which means what?
Which means 6 because you have 6 elements.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is basically like saying for I in 6, right? And so the way the for loop works is if this is a range of things, then it iterates through the numbers in that range. If it's not a range, it's going to try to iterate or traverse by element instead, right? It's going to try to index this thing, right? And this is what type of object is 6?
An integer.
Yeah, it's an integer. And can you iterate? Can you traverse an integer?
No.
No, exactly, right? Which is why I was throwing you that error, but saying like, I can't do that, right? You're asking me to do for I in 6. That doesn't make any sense, right? Okay. So right. Okay. So say that we wanted to take this whole thing and traverse it by element. How would we do that?
For
So
I in range 6 instead of, well, I mean.
So just to clarify things, so traversing by index means that you're using the index of the object that has multiple elements, right? To isolate. So you're essentially saying like, I'm going to create a variable called I. I'm going to give it a number, which is going to represent the index numbers of my potato. And then I'm going to go through my potato one index at a time, right? That's what traversing by index means. Traversing by element means ignore all of the indexes. We actually don't care about index. We're just going to like traverse the actual object itself. We're going to traverse potato one element at a time. So how would we do that?
Then wouldn't it be for I in range and then my string?
No, because if you're doing for I in range, you're basically, so how, actually, let me, so you're saying for I in range 6 or like, yeah. And then what would go under it? Or would you just kind of leave it like that?
I would leave it like that, but I think I'm wrong.
So this is traversing by index, right? Because you're essentially using the index I to traverse your thing here, which is exactly like what we did over here, and that's traversing by index, right? Because literally, like you're using the index I over there. What we're saying now is we want to traverse by element, which is a different way of doing it, where we're not even, there shouldn't be any brackets because we're not using any indices, right? So how do we do that?
I'm not sure.
That's okay. So let's actually just back up for 1 second. Okay. So in the traversing by index version of things, in the first iteration of the loop, what value will I have?
P.
Nope.
So what I will have?
Yeah.
It will be 0.
Correct. And then second iteration.
It will be 1.
And so if I run this, oh yeah, sorry about that. So if I run this, it should do 0 and 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we're creating a variable called I, and in that variable I, we're going to store the numbers, the values of the indices that we want to pull out of our variable myString, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. All right. When we're traversing by element, what we want to do is instead of doing that, we don't want to mess around with indices at all, right? What we want to do is just straight up take our potato, in other words, myString, and take one element or each element one at a time of that object and store that into a new variable at each iteration of the loop. That's what we're trying to do. And so the way you would do that is if you did for I in range myString, what value would I have in that case in the first iteration of the loop?
Would it
Oh.
be
Would it be P?
Yeah, it'd be P, right? Because in this case, what it's doing is it's taking, yeah, there we go. So if you think of potato as, oh, that's not great at all. Right, so if you think of potato as not a word, but an actual object with multiple, jeez, my spelling today. All right, so if you take potato as an object with multiple elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, what it's doing in the first iteration of the loop, because you're saying for I in myString, and myString here is the object potato or the string potato, then I will take on the value of this, and then second iteration will take on the value of this, third iteration the value of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And so assuming that is all true, it should do the same thing. Yeah, and that's essentially how you would do traverse by element to get the same result as above here, right? Ideally, you wouldn't call this I, because the reason we call this I is short for index, right? So I would probably call this car for character, because that's what this variable actually contains now in this case, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That was a not so certain yeah.
I just wonder when it comes to our coding questions and we might have to do a traverse by index or by element, will it clearly state like what our answer should look like, or is that completely blank and we should figure that out on our own?
So for the coding questions, if your coding question requires you to traverse something by something, it is entirely up to you to do either which way that you want. Again, like I don't care how you get there, I care that your thing works and it does what it's supposed to. So if I'm asking you to, if in the midterm I'm asking you to produce this, you could do this or this, doesn't matter. They're equivalent in my head.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, again, I mean, unless we explicitly say you need to do this way, which I don't think there's anywhere in the exam where we say that. But unless it's like super explicitly clear that you need to do it a certain way, otherwise doesn't matter. As long as you get to this, that's all I care about.
Okay.
Is that good for traversing?
Yes, I get it now.
All right. I mean, I would say definitely it's worth practicing, spending a little time just messing around I mean, basically just kind of redoing sort of what I just did there. This is sort of like what I would do if I'm trying to understand how something works. I would just try to like build like really simple examples and try to like make it work or try to break it and try to figure out how it all kind of works, right? Okay. Then I think, okay. All right, so then someone asked a question about worksheet 8, which I believe is basically this. Okay. All right, so I haven't actually looked at the worksheet questions in a while, so we'll get to discover this together. All right, so if you write a function called first and last, that takes one string argument and returns a new string containing the first and last characters in the argument. If the argument is an empty string, return none. All right, so so the way that I would tackle this is I would start like just break down the question to the simplest, smallest elements. I know that I need to make a function called first and last, so let's define a function called first and last, right? Then it's telling me that it's going to have one string argument. So I'm going to call this a string. And then it's telling me that it needs to return. So right there, I'm going to put return something that I'm going to fill out later when I figure it out. The first and last characters in the argument, right? So the first and last characters of a string. So that's pretty easy. So I'm going to return first and last. Oh no. Yeah, don't do what I just did or almost did of calling your variables the same thing as your functions. That is a good way to get yourself confused. Okay. So how do I do this? How do I get the first and last characters of a string?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm just asking, how would I get the first and last characters of a string, right? What I want is I want the first and last characters of this. So how do I do that?
Wouldn't you do that? Well, we could do it by traverse, no? But then limit the loop to only one number for the first and the last.
I mean, so you could traverse, but in this case, do we need to iterate through every single character in the string?
No, we only need one.
Well, we need two characters, right?
Yeah, but
So again, like all of these things, let's break it down to an even simpler problem. How do I get the first character of a string?
well, it's 0, it's the element 0, so it's the first run.
And how would I code that?
Are we making a variable or, well, no, you're doing a function, so.
The variable is a string. We want the first character of a string. So like if let's do just have an example. Let's do potato again. So say that we have, so I know that this doesn't necessarily make sense because you're making the variable outside of the function and then we're doing stuff with it. But actually, let's do my let's do that, and then let's do that. Okay, so I want the P. How do I get the P out of potato?
We do for loop.
Okay, how would I do that?
You could do, I'm not sure exactly how to word it, but for the basic a string bracket 0.
Yeah, so if you did this, so what does a string evaluate to in this function call? Like when you call this function with this variable, what does a string evaluate to?
Potato.
Potato, right? And so basically that's sort of like saying string potato bracket 0, right? And string potato bracket 0, what does this evaluate to?
That's P.
P, right? So that gives us the first letter of, so we take that and we store it into a variable, right? So we have the first character of our string. How do we get the last one?
Well, we would make a variable last with underscore letter, and then equals a string, and then 5, because we start at 0.
Okay, so yeah, right. So saying potato 5, like this, potato 5 is O, and so that yeah. So this is the same thing as saying this when you call this function, right?
Mhm.
Okay. However, what if the next function call you do carrots and peas? What would last letter contain in that case?
It would only go off of the word carrot.
What do you mean?
Wouldn't it? Well, it
So
would have 0 or 5 and 5 from carrots and peas.
right, and what would last letter contain?
T.
Yeah, right, because that's the fifth element of carrots and peas. And is T what we want?
No, we want the S of peas in this case, I assume.
Correct. So this works for a specific case where you're just trying to do it with the string potato, but it doesn't work for the general case of doing it with any string that you throw at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we fix that?
It would be
Len.
a string. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
In the brackets instead of 5, you could put len a string, and
Like
then
that?
outside it -1.
Okay, why?
Because for the index it starts at 0, and for the length it counts the length up from 1.
Yeah, exactly, right. So the length of potato is 6, and the last element is at position 5, right? So that's why you need to do, so this would evaluate to 6 in the case of potato, and so 6 minus 1 is what you need to get to the last letter of that, right? Okay, so I think, okay, yeah, we're actually almost there. And so what we want is to return the first and last characters. So how would we, I'm assuming what it means is basically just a string containing the first and the last character and nothing else. So how do we do that?
Is it okay to jump in?
Yeah.
Or, okay. I think it would be print, or like, put the function in the main and with your string that you want in the parameters, and then print first letter plus last letter.
Like that?
Plus last letter.
Oh yeah, sorry. Like that?
I think so.
Ish. So
Wait, and do you want a space or sorry?
what?
No, I just was no, I don't think so.
So you're halfway there. So what the question is asking you is it specifically saying returns a new string containing the first and last characters of the element, right? And so that's why when I first set up my function, and that's why like this is why I approach things this way, is I start by putting in my function definition, like where I want to start and where I want to finish. And this is where I want to finish because it's saying I want to return, because it specifically says return a new string containing the first and last characters in the argument, right? So if I do print, it'll actually print it, but it won't return that, right?
Would you want to put that in the variable first and last character? And then return first and last character?
Wait, so sorry, that's a little
Sorry,
confusing.
so I was just putting first letter plus last letter, that string concatenation into a variable called first and last character.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I figured that's what you meant, but that's a lot of first and last.
Yes.
Like that, right?
Yeah. Without
need...
deleting the print.
Exactly.
And you could just put that in your main for the function.
Put what?
Right.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Put the print
Yeah.
first and last.
Okay, so if we actually try this out, will it actually work? Right, good. It should also work with this, CNS for carrots and peas. So far this seems to actually be working, and so far so good. The last thing this thing says is if the argument is empty, return the string, or sorry, if the argument has an empty string, it should return none, right? So right now, if I do this, it should return none, but it doesn't. It actually throws me an error, right? So what do I need to do to add this extra piece of it?
Would you?
Go ahead.
Well, maybe with an if statement.
Yeah, if what? And where, more importantly? So actually, let's actually ignore the code for right now, and like especially for if-else statements. What I often do is actually just draw like decision trees, because that's essentially what an if-else statement is, right? So what behavior do I want to happen, right? So I'm going to throw a string. Pardon my terrible writing. I'm going to throw a string at it here. I want one of two things to happen, right? So in one case, I want, for example, for potato PNO to be returned. And in the other case, what do I want to have happen?
None. You want it to return none.
None, right? So if my string, so if, let's see, all right, so if I throw potato at it, then I want this to happen. And if I throw just an empty string, I want this to happen, right? Okay, so that basically gives me the structure of how I want things to happen, right? So at what point should this decision happen in my code?
As soon as we bring the variable in. So as soon as we basically assign a string to a word or nothing.
Right, and so where does that happen right now? Which line?
At the top. At line 100 is where the if statement would start.
Yeah, exactly, right. Because essentially, as soon as you call your function in your function definition, this is where a string gets assigned whatever the argument was, right? So this is the stage at which this a string is assigned a value. And so right after that is where you would need your if statement, right? So if what?
Well, it would be if variable is a word, but that's just pseudo. So,
I mean, so it's not, that's not actually even correct, right? So the if argument is an empty string, it's literally like, it's telling you like in the project, in the question, what it wants you to do if the argument is an empty string. So how do I code that into Python?
if my string equals English is not my first language, so I'm trying to think of simple. It's the quotes, like the double quotes.
Like
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so essentially, yeah. So empty string is basically like two quotes next to each other, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what do we want to happen in that case?
Return none.
Right.
And then else. The function. Yeah.
Like all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that should work. And we can actually,
Or
yeah.
should we use an element?
What's that?
Or should we, well, my confusion comes a little bit in when we say if, elif and else, because in certain cases we only use an elif, but in this case, wouldn't we just use an else because there's nothing else? It's either it's none or it's something, right?
Yes. Yeah. So in this case, yeah. So in this case, and the thing is, like with this decision tree, you can very easily see there's only two options. So it's if this, else that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So that works. However, it is throwing me an error. Why is that?
This one thing is out of range. The index is out of string index is out of range.
Does anyone else see it?
Is it that you should be not using a return statement at that point, or like you should maybe just say that it's like something is true or false or something like that, and then
No.
Oh.
So this is this is essentially how it should be. So if
string index out of range. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, dog is barking at small children. Okay. So no, so this is what we want. We want to return none if it's an empty string, and we want to return this if it's anything else, right? So that's good. So what else? What could be the issue?
Well, on line 100, shouldn't it be a string instead of my string?
Yes, exactly. Because my string is the name of the variable that you create outside of your function and that you pass as the argument. A string is the name of the parameter that you create inside your variable, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now if we do that, so that works, and that presumably returns none. At least it doesn't throw an error. But what we can do is we can print it, and it returns none, right?
So on our midterm, when it comes to this, what we also in our main function basically give the print that you just did if it has to return none, for instance, if there's nothing in there. Do we need to put print there as well for you guys?
No. Unless explicitly asked, like unless we explicitly say like print whatever, like unless we specifically ask you to, then no, you don't need to. And for the midterm, I would say that yeah, for the midterm coding questions, we will specifically give you what function calls we want you to do with what arguments and all that. So you don't have to guess for any of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, the definition is what's mostly important, and then we'll ask you to do a function call of your function, just one with like specific parameters. So
Oh, okay, I see.
All right. And then, okay, so I think that's good for that first question. Let's see the second question. Okay. All right, so write a function called smallest that takes one non-empty string argument and returns the smallest character that is not a space, tab, or new line. Assume the first character in a string is not a space, tab, or new line. What kind of traversal did you use? Write a function. All right, so let's split that up into two because that's a different function. All right, so again, I'm going to start with just setting up the basics, and then we can fill in everything that goes in the middle, right? So we're going to set up with our setting up a function definition, and then it says returns. So I'm going to put a return there, and I'm going to call whatever I'm going to return the smallest character, right? Okay, so how do I do this? Oh yeah, and it says it takes one non-empty string argument. So I'm going to call this non-empty string. Okay, and then let's say that let's call our function. Okay, how do we do this? Okay, so let's break it down to simplest elements. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's saying a couple things. It wants the smallest character that isn't a space, tab, or new line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hang on one second. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so it's saying two different things, but instead of tackling both at the same time, let's start with the simplest one. How do we get the smallest character in potato?
It would be 0, so
So not the character of the smallest index, it's saying the smallest character.
we would look at the whole word and how many elements it has.
Why?
Oh, we're talking about ABC and then the smallest of that.
Yeah, exactly. Hang on. I can still hear you, but I need to step away for a second.
Sure.
Right, exactly. It's asking you like what is the smallest letter in terms of like, A would be smaller than B and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we do that? Or even simpler than that, how do we compare letters? How do we know if in Python if A is smaller than B?
I know we've seen this in one of our lectures, but
Yes. I mean, anyone else can jump into if you know.
I'm trying to think. Which lecture was and then pull it up.
I mean, so what I would do if I'm not sure is I would just straight Google it. I would Python compare letters. Yeah, you can compare strings in Python using the equal and all these signs greater than blah, 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 right?
Okay.
So what I would do then is I would come over here and I would actually try it out. So I would say, is A smaller than B? And obviously we're talking about strings, so we're going to make them strings. And so if I run this code, what should I expect to see if this is making appropriate comparisons?
Well, say that's like true.
True. So far so good. What about, is B smaller than A? That should return
False.
right, should evaluate to false. Yeah, and then for example, I think this, obviously that'll be true. So we can use basically greater than and all of those signs to compare letters, right? So that gives us a first building block that we need. We know how to compare letters now. So that's one thing. So aside from being able to compare letters, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to compare letters within a string, right?
Yeah.
So how would we do that?
We would have to take every letter separately and compare it to each other.
Yes. And what tool do we have at our disposal that allows us to do that? I can still hear you. I need to step away. My dog is being difficult.
You're okay. I have one here too that has this issue, so don't worry. No, we couldn't work with a while loop or anything like that because while true, so no. Mm.
Is there a way you could do, like, while the character at the index of 0 is somehow less than the next character, then you print that one, and then else you print the next, or something like that?
Yeah. That's definitely getting closer. Or at least the idea is good. It needs a little bit of refining, but you're on the right track.
Could we also do something with an if statement?
I think that'd be hard. I think you definitely need to. So the idea of a while loop. So why were you thinking of using a while loop?
Because it's while something within the word equals to do this.
Yeah. So I mean, so in this case, so the easiest way, so essentially what we're trying to do, just taking a step back, essentially what we're trying to do is compare each letter within the string to the other letters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to accomplish. You could write something super long, super complicated that compares one letter to every other letter, and then the next letter to every other letter, and so on and so forth. But that's not super useful, because the thing is, we don't actually need to do all of that. We just need to figure out which one is the smallest, right?
Mhm.
So like if you're comparing like numbers or something, right? You wouldn't need to compare all the numbers. You would just need to compare one number to another one and then just keep the lowest one, right?
Yes.
So, and it's the same thing here that we're trying to do here. We're trying to compare two letters and then just retain the lowest one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that? Or like more like what tool do we have that allows us to do that?
Could we
I'll give you a
put
hint. It's
the
something
loop
that we talked about.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Could we use a for loop and then put a while loop in it?
We can try. So that's in the right direction, but so that's another like helpful tip for coding. Sometimes like if you have sort of an idea of like where you're trying to go, sometimes it makes sense to start putting it down, and then as you go you realize like, oh, this doesn't work, or this part of it needs to be different or whatever. But at least like putting something down allows you to kind of like move your thinking forward a little bit. So we can definitely do that. So you're saying do a for loop for what?
For character. In range of non-empty string, maybe?
Is this what you're saying?
I was going more, I didn't have the len in front of it, but it would make sense to have the len in front of it.
I mean, if you do range on a string, then that doesn't work, right? Because range only takes ints as arguments.
Right. So len, maybe? Oh,
So what's that?
yeah, no, you're the way that you have it right now, but Lauren, what were you thinking of?
I was thinking after that, well, I was thinking that, or because I don't think the variable for char or I, like character or I, matters that much. But and then something along the lines of underneath that, while non-empty string index 0 is less than non-empty string or for this, would it be less than or equal to? Because what if they're the same character?
So that depends a little bit on how you set things up, but I would say for right now, don't worry about it.
Okay. And I was gonna say non-empty string index character.
Okay, and here just for the sake of making sure that we, so what value would this variable have in the first iteration of the loop?
It will be 0, well, it will be,
It'd be whatever the index 0 is for the string, right?
No, it would be 0.
0?
Because we're traversing a range which is numbers, right?
Oh, yeah.
better to
So
make I in this.
so this
Yeah.
would be I, or just to keep, or just to kind of keep things consistent, just because, and again, like calling your variables by what they actually are, because if you call if you call it character and it's actually a number, then it's way easier to get confused, right? So
It'd help my brain more if we did the for loop from 1 until the length of non-empty string. So can we do 1 comma? Because otherwise, wouldn't it throw an error because non-empty string at 0 is going to equal non-empty string at I if I equals 0?
But
yes, but okay, but yes, yeah, okay, we can do that. And actually, is it comma or is it colon? I never.
I think it's comma, but for the while statement, wouldn't it like have an issue once, like for instance, if we have pair, the A is smaller than the P and the E, so wouldn't that, when would it take over to be like, okay, now I'm gonna look from A and the following letters in this case? Wouldn't that 0 basically put us in a stuck position? Or would the while underneath what we put in the while loop help us to get out of it? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, and that would be an issue, because the thing is, like, essentially what we're doing here is we'd be comparing, for example, potato, we'd be comparing P to, for example, O to T to A to T to O, which depending on what happens after could be okay or could be an issue. so again, let's not worry too much about that for now. Let's kind of like finish what we're doing here and see what we end up with and if it makes sense or not.
Okay, I was gonna ask, should the while be turned into an if instead, so we could do if else?
Maybe you tell me.
Oh, I think that'd be better.
All right. So if what?
Well, would we then not move on to the next letter? So I plus 1, like compare I plus 1.
I mean, so the loop will
Right.
necessarily do I plus 1, right? So the loop is doing that for us. Actually, so let's do no, let's not do that. Okay, so let's pretend that right now we're creating this function and we're calling it with my string, which is a string potato, right? So let's actually like put some values into our example just to see what we're doing and what it's doing, right? So say that we're doing this with potato. If we want to not that. If we want to basically rewrite all this with the specific case of potato, what would this evaluate to?
6.
6, right? So so this is one part of it, and then so what I would do then is what does for I would want to make sure that my 4 is doing what I think it is, and this is what I'm saying also, like really what you need to do is make sure each little bit of code is doing what you think it is before moving on to the next thing, right? Like trying to build a whole elaborate bit of code without making sure that the little bits work is a really good way to get yourself in trouble. So I would do this, print I. So my value of I is taking on the value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So I will have the value of 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So I at least know that this is working the way that I think it is, with my I range with length of non-empty string, right?
Mhm.
So that's good. So okay, so if I'm doing this, then in this case, what would non-empty string 0 be?
In this case, it would be the P for potato.
Yeah.
If we look at the potato, we're of course.
Yeah, we're in this bit of code, we're assuming that the string is potato. And what would this evaluate to in the first iteration?
Yeah, so that would be O.
Not 0, O, right? Okay. So if P is smaller than O, what do we want to happen?
We then want to compare P to the second index.
That would be in the second loop, but the thing is, so right now we're just comparing, but we're not. That's it, right? We're not like storing that information. The thing is, we know that at some point we have to return smallest character, right? So at some point, smallest character is going to need to be is going to have a value assigned to it, right?
Yeah.
And presumably at some point in this loop is where that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that happen?
Couldn't under the if you set the variable smallest character equal to well, it'd be P in this case, or the non-empty string at 0 in the other one.
Yeah, so yeah, let's yeah, this is getting confusing, but let's do that like this. This is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in the second iteration, I mean, so that's going to be a problem. Do you see why?
Yeah, because if we look at potato A, you don't want it to take on the index 0 necessarily, because we basically need whatever is between the brackets where we see 0, we want to have whatever is smaller to take that position going forward.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that this shouldn't be that. This should be this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because literally that, like the words that you just said, that's literally what you just said, just in code, right? Like what we want to compare is whatever's in this to the next letter in the string, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's good, but there's something else missing. So in the first iteration of the loop, what value will smallest character have?
It will be that index. So
No. So where is the first time? So actually, let's get rid of this for now because that's better. Where is the first place that smallest character is defined?
within your if loop currently, but we need to put it outside first and basically have it empty to start off with. We don't
So
want
you're
it there from the
you're-
beginning. Yes, like that.
okay. So if we do that, so the first thing that I want to know, which I actually don't know offhand, is this smaller than A? Right, because the thing is right now, if you're assigning this to that, then smallest character is probably the smallest character of anything.
Yeah, it breaks it by putting that there.
Yeah. So instead of making it empty, what could we do instead?
Non-empty string. No.
Yeah.
Need a letter in there, so and it needs to be from your non-empty string. So yes, it would be
Yeah, because the thing is, if if our for loop is starting at index 1, right? We're essentially doing this first step of putting the 0th character into smallest character, and then we're iterating through index 1 to the end of the word. Right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So okay, so if we think about this, at this point in the code, what does smallest character evaluate to if we're passing potato?
P.
P, right? All right, then we're doing this. So for I in length 6, right? And then it's going to compare this, which we just said evaluates to P, and it's going to compare it to
O.
O. So is P smaller than O?
No, it's not. O is smaller.
Correct. So if P is smaller than O, so if this is true, what should happen here?
The smallest character should take on the that non-empty string 0. But
Why 0?
because it needs to take on, well, no, it needs to take on the value of whoever is smaller, which in this case would be non-empty string brackets I.
So let's
Wouldn't
once
we
again.
put that part in an else statement though? Because right now we're saying that the smallest character, which is the non-empty string 0, is smaller than the non-empty string I.
So yes, but once again, let's just break it down to a decision tree. If this is true, so if like whatever's over here is smaller than whatever's here, what should happen to smallest character? Like which, so let's call this character 1 and this character 2. If character 1 is smaller than character 2, what should smallest character be equal to?
It would take on 2.
It should take on character 1 since it's smaller, less than.
Right.
Smaller needs to be taken on.
Right. And in this case, smallest character, so this is actually smallest character. So does smallest character need to be redefined?
Well, that depends. Are we talking potato right now?
Yeah, all right. Let me reframe some stuff because this is getting confusing for no reason. All right. So what I'm saying is smallest character less than non-empty at I, right? So I'm basically saying this, right? So this is what I'm saying. So at this decision point where we're asking is smallest character smaller than this other character, if smallest character is smaller, what should happen to smallest character?
Stay the same.
It should stay the same, right? So right. So in this point of the decision tree, basically nothing happens, or you don't need to do anything, right? Because basically you just keep smallest character like it was. If this isn't true, what should happen?
Then we should take on the value of 2, or the non-empty string I in this case.
Right. So smallest character should take on the value of whatever this is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, which would be non-empty I, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's basically our if-else statement. We're saying if this is true, then do nothing, and if it's false, do something else, right? So if this is true, what do we do?
We return the smallest character that entered our group.
So if you do the return there, it'll basically, like in the case of potato, it would be like, yes,
It has to take on that, it has to keep that value. I'm not sure how we could, without a return, how could we make sure that it keeps that value in there and moves on to the next step?
so right. So essentially what we're saying is we want nothing to happen here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So let's for right now, let's just do nothing. And then we're gonna have an else here. So what do we want to happen if else is true?
If else is true, we want it to take on the value of non-empty string I.
And so we would do this equals that, right?
Non-empty string I, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so in this case, if we have an if statement where one of the two conditions is empty, we don't need an if else, right? Because there's only one thing that we want. Essentially, this decision tree, this decision doesn't ever doesn't need to do anything, and so we just have one thing that happens. And so what we could do is, instead of saying if smallest is smaller than none, we could just flip it
Yeah,
and move that up there, right?
okay,
And so if the smallest character is bigger than the new character, then we would define the smallest character, and else doesn't matter. We do nothing else, right?
correct.
Right. So that's that. So I think we can try it out. I think that should work.
So we can have an open if statement that doesn't close off.
I mean, yes, because an if statement is closed in and of itself, right? If something is true, do something, the end, right? If it's not true, just move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I know that, like, it's hard to, like, accept that, like, an if doesn't need an else, but it doesn't. Like, what I very well could do is just, instead of doing an else, what I could do is do this, right? So this is basically an if else. Well, that's not true. In this case, it's an if else because only one of two things can be true. But essentially, that's functionally the same thing as doing an if else. You could just do a series of if statements, and achieve more or less the same thing.
Is that recommended?
No, generally no, because the thing is, if you do a bunch of if statements, you won't catch cases where you get something that you're not expecting. So in the case here, so the reason why this works here is because this can only be, well, that's not true. Actually, so in this case, you would also need,
What if
if
it's
you would need a third case, because there are three things that are possible in this case, right? It could either be smaller, greater, or equal. So this would catch all the same conditions as an if else. But an if else allows you to do if this or anything else, which would be these two possible conditions. Does that kind of make sense?
yes, but wouldn't we then use an elif instead?
No. No, and I mean, we don't need to, like, spend a whole lot of time on this, because I feel like this is getting
In the wrong direction?
well, I think we're getting increasingly confusing for no reason at all. So the only point is that so here in this case, with the conditions we're setting up, there are only three things that are possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be either greater, smaller, or equal. Those are the only three possibilities that could ever occur, right?
Right.
So if you do if else, you're saying if this is true, which is one of the conditions, do this, else, which is basically if it's smaller or equal, right?
Yeah.
So you could do if and then else, and that would catch that. Yeah. But again, so the reason you do else is to catch all of the things that you're not necessarily expecting to catch all the other cases, right? And so you could potentially do else, elif, and then, or you could potentially do this, right?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah, except so in this case, this or just if is the exact same thing, because there's only three possible outcomes, right? There's only three possible conditions. However, if you're making more complicated comparisons where other cases are possible, the else catches all of those other possibilities, right? An if is very, very specific. It's testing for one very, very specific thing. An else is like if one thing or anything else, right?
And within our else statement, we can nest even more if statements if we wanted to, like we just did earlier.
Yeah, you could if you want. I mean, really, you can organize this any which way you want. But exactly, and the point, and that's kind of the point, is that you could do if else, you could do three ifs, you could do if el or elif elif. You could do either which way, and it would all result in the same thing, more or less.
Okay.
Right. Okay, but so okay, so if we actually try to run this, I think. Oh no. Where did I mess up? Oh, I think I know why. Yeah, okay. So the smallest character in potato is indeed A, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. So far so good. And so let's double check that it's not just a fluke. And let's do another word, a word that doesn't have an A. Hello, right? So here is what should we get?
We should get an E.
Correct. So that's good. So far so good, right? So coming back to the question, so it returns the smallest character. So we did that first part, and then the other part is that's not a space, a tab, or a new line.
Okay.
So we need to add that to what we already have, right? So how do we do that?
With an if statement.
Yes. Where?
I think it's below our current if statement, but it could be wrong.
I mean, so there's there's an infinity of ways of doing this. So so you're saying put it here?
No, like below that line. So let's say line 23.
Here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and then if what?
Well, it wouldn't be if it's a tab, a new line or a space. It wouldn't be a word. So
I mean, Python doesn't know what a word is, right?
true.
So if we think about this, right? So the way that this is set up is you should be asking, as you're going through letter by letter, you should be asking, is this bigger than this?
Mhm.
And what else? And is
That not smallest character not equal to, or is not empty string not equal to a tab, space, or new line.
exactly right. So you could, there's different ways of doing this, but I think probably the way that makes most sense to me is, so you first check this. So is this true? So if it's true, then the new character is smaller than the old character. And then you could do an if. You could also just check if this is a space, right? Or
Dash T. Yep. Or and then again and then dash N.
right. So what I would do here is just to make sure that this actually works the way that I think it does. Okay, so I would set up a simple example over here just to make sure that this is telling me what I need to have it. So let's do a, actually, let's do this. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a string containing the letter A. Stop it. Right. So we're setting the character A into a test string, and then we're basically testing. So this should evaluate to what?
That should evaluate to A since we set test string as an A. So, well, actually, no. That should be false because test string is an A and therefore not a tab, not a new line, nor a space.
Correct. So that should evaluate to, oh, it helps if you actually evaluate it. That should evaluate to false, right?
Yes.
Okay. What about this? This should, hopefully, if we did this right, should evaluate to
A. Oh, it should evaluate to space right now.
this.
Oh, true, because test string equals a space. So
Oh, but no, that's actually my fault. Yeah, I forgot to redefine test string. Right, so that does evaluate to true, right?
yeah.
And then same thing, if we do /t, evaluates to true, and /n evaluates to true. So, and again, I'm just doing this to make sure that this conditional statement works the way that I think it does. And so I'm at least confident about how this is working, right?
Okay.
Okay, so if this is true,
Mhm.
is this what we want to have happen?
Yes.
No. No, because essentially what we're saying is if this is true,
So,
it's actually a character we don't want, right?
right. So the smallest character would go back to non-zero, but that doesn't.
No. So taking a step back, what we're trying to do, we're basically setting up conditions where
Oh,
we want this to happen, where we want to replace smallest character with a new character, right? So the conditions in which we want to replace smallest character is one, if the new character is smaller,
mhm.
right? And if all of this, any of these things is not true.
Right.
So right now we have it set up where this will return true when any of this is real, is true. And we don't want that. What we want is not that, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So anytime that, as long as this non-empty string isn't a blank or a t or an n, then you'll replace the smallest character, right? So we're basically saying, is the new character smaller? Yes. And is the new character not a space, a t, or an n?
Correct.
Right. Okay, so then if we do this, I think that should work. Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah.
And actually, so just to, what I would do here, just to kind of gut check myself to make sure, is I would take that out and see what happens if I have a space. Yeah. So if you don't have that there, space is a smaller character than all the other characters, right?
Mhm.
So if we don't have that if statement there, then it returns the empty or the space as being the smallest character, which is why we need that there.
And so that it doesn't do that.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a long way around.
But so from what I've been seeing, how you've been going through the functions, you're basically breaking it down to like the smallest part of
Always.
the question or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean it's like it's like simple basic problem solving, right? Like we give you a big complicated problem, and then you obviously can't solve the whole big complicated problem at once. I mean you just can't, right? Your brain's not built that way. So you break it down to the smallest tiny little bit of thing that you know how to do. Like, and that's why I started like like smallest character. Okay, so how do we compare characters? And even that, like, I was like getting back to like, how do you even compare characters, right? Do we even know that? No, then figure out how to do that. Then start the next piece, like, okay, so I know how to compare characters. How do I compare the characters in my string? Then you do that. Then you build it onto, like, add one thing at a time. And that's definitely by far the easiest way to tackle any of these things, right? Just take the big complicated problem, break it down to the smallest, like even like trivial stupid thing that like is like obvious, break it down to that and then build on that, right? You want to build on things that you are solid and confident about and add to that, not try to like solve the whole thing all at once.
So what would would we have enough time to break our questions down to that degree when we take our midterm?
Yeah, so the way that I set it up, yeah, so I forget, I think originally, actually, let me double check. But yeah, I significantly increased the total amount of time that you have to do it. Just because, again, I'm not trying to test how quickly you can do stuff. I'm trying to test like what you actually know. And the thing is, like I can give you 5 hours, but if you're stuck, you're stuck. Like, there's a point at which there's diminishing returns on what you can and can't figure out.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to. That's what I want to get to. I don't want to like figure out like how quickly you can do stuff. I want to figure out where that like that breaking point is of like where you're stuck and you can't figure out further.
And so what if we have, for instance, a partial code that runs? Will we get partial credit for the coding question, or would it completely shut us?
No, so basically, the way the grading guide is made is basically like for different elements that we're asking for. If some of it works, then you get some points for it, and generally it's pretty generous, like or
Okay.
like fairly generous.
Okay, awesome. Just in
Uh,
case I get stuck. And so,
yeah. So right now, I think the time limit is 2 hours. I think it used to be 80 minutes, and I just bumped it up to 2 hours because. Sorry about that.
you're okay.
Calm down. Yeah, we're working on her barking. But yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, so yeah, I was saying like it used to be 80 minutes. I bumped up to 2 hours, and even then, I'd be fine like bump it up to like 2.5 or 3 hours or whatever. Like again, I don't care about how quickly you do it. And there's definitely there's a point where no matter how much more time I give you, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because eventually it's just you keep spinning wheels in a sense.
Yeah, and actually, I think I need to kind of stop it there because we're already past 7.
Yep.
Any other last like quick things, or can we call it there?
Not for me. I don't know about the rest, but I'm good. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course, and I'll put the recording up on D2L in a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and good luck.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.